From the 1011 Now streaming studio in Lincoln, Nebraska, this is the N Report Husker Show, sponsored by Fat Dog's Convenience Store.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Danielle Shank alongside Kevin Sjuts, our sports director in the 1011 Now streaming studio for another edition of N Report Husker Show, brought to you by Fat Dog's Convenience Store. So, Kevin, Husker women's basketball, they're kind of on a hot streak right now.
I like where you're starting here. Yeah, this is great. Back-to-back wins for Amy Williams and her team in Indianapolis. And for those folks that watched Thursday night's win, that was an adventurous game against Illinois. The second game in 24 hours, 29 hours for Nebraska. You thought maybe fatigue would set in because that was a tough game, but they grinded it out. They had a nice spurt there in the fourth quarter. Britt Prince led Nebraska with 17 points. This is a freshman playing on the biggest stage of her life, couldn't you say? Conference tournament?
Yeah, and I mean, she always shows up in March, considering how well she did, girls basketball, high school state basketball is happening right now. But, I mean, what does that say that Britt Prince is the one to step up in this moment? I think Illinois has held Alexis Markowski below her usual.
9 points for Alexis Markowski. Amy Williams said after the fact that she was the MVP of the game. So don't look at the stat line. Amy Williams is just really proud of Alexis in the way that she led that team, vocally inspired the girls as they were trailing in the fourth quarter. But on the topic of Britt Prince, Danny, you don't know how it's ever going to translate from high school to freshman. It's such a big jump.
Yeah.
And plus in the Big Ten, you're playing against some very elite athletes. And here it is. The four-time state champion from Elkhorn North taking on Illinois in Indianapolis in a tie game in the fourth quarter. She hits a runner to break the tie. Nebraska never trails again, and Prince is at the podium with a big smile on her face afterwards as Nebraska wins in the second round. They now play in the quarterfinals against number 2. That's according to the Big Ten seeds. If you look at the AP poll, number 4 nationally. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
The fourth best team in the country is the second best team in the Big Ten, and that's who the Huskers play here tonight.
Yeah, is USC the first?
USC's number 1, the Big Ten champs.
And I mean, what does that say about the women's team that they're just kind of have some all-around players that are willing to step up?
They are willing to step up, and it's so good that players like Britt Prince have elevated their game because Nebraska's played most of this season without Natalie Potts and without Allison Widener, and Kennedy Williams is redshirting this season. So Nebraska's had a short deck of cards to play with, yet they're still finding ways to win. They're now at 21 on the season. Everybody says 20 is the magic number. I felt like Nebraska was going to make the NCAA tournament regardless of how the conference tourney went. Here they are getting a couple of really nice wins to add to their resume. And no matter what happens the rest of this week, I think Selection Sunday is going to be a good experience for Amy Williams and her team.
Yeah. How do you think their odds are kind of shaping up?
I think they're going to be in. I think I can say that fairly confidently. This is a team that was ranked at one point in the season. They have some quad 1 wins. They have a few hiccups in there as well, but I think that they've kind of overcome some of the blemishes on the resume with what they've done in Indianapolis.
Yeah, and then taking, men's team. The last time that we talked, we were a little bit hopeful. They just had to win some of the key games that we thought that they could pull out, and we're sitting in a not pretty spot right now.
Well, Nebraska's lost 5 of their last 6. And as they went through the end of February and into March, everyone knew what was at stake for Nebraska. Those were games that Nebraska had to win, and if they do, they're going to be safely in the NCAA tournament. They didn't win the games, and now some consider them still a bubble team. Some say they're off the bubble and out. ESPN earlier this week had Nebraska in when they played at Ohio State. If I look at the updated metrics right now, the Torvik, which is a good way to gauge what your tournament chances are, has Nebraska at a 4% chance at making the NCAA tournament. However, ESPN has Nebraska as a 79% chance at making the NCAA tournament. So they're kind of really all over the place. There's one regular season game. That's against Iowa. Now, if Nebraska loses to Iowa on Sunday on senior night, might as well put that chance at 0.
Yeah.
Nebraska's not going to make it in outside of making a run in Indianapolis and winning the Big Ten tournament. If Nebraska defeats Iowa and they go to the conference tournament and they get a couple of wins then, I think they're right back in that 50, 60% chance of making the big dance. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, but right now, if you have like the little meter in which way is the arrow pointing, it's below 50% in my opinion. but there's the opportunity for it to still swing up. This has to be maddening for Fred Hoiberg because, he knows what's at stake. His team knows what's at stake. They've tried to put in the game plans. He's, I'm sure, given all of his best pregame speeches, but the results haven't come.
Yeah, and when it comes to the tough loss that they had against Ohio State, double overtime, they've had a couple of close losses. And, what more can you ask from Bryce Williams, who's putting up 43 points, school record?
43, and they lost.
Yeah.
So I don't know how fans feel about, the fact that Bryce Williams breaks the record and he surpasses Eric Piakowski, but does the feel-good element of a school record performance kind of get lost in the fact that that game ended in an L?
Yeah.
I think so.
I feel like it does,
right?
Too. It's just so unfortunate. And then, Juwan Gary's been putting up some good points too, but there's no one who seems to be helping pitch in. And, it's incredible that Bryce and Juwan can continue to put up good numbers and not get, put down a little bit and have someone else step up. It's just no one else is stepping up.
It's really a two-man team offensively for Nebraska, and I think that's the easy diagnosis for anybody that's watching this team. And what has to change if Nebraska wants to make it into the NCAA tournament? They need to have more balance in the scoring column, because right now it is Bryce Williams 1A and Juwan Gary 1B. They need a Connor Essegian to get a 15-point game in there. Actually, he has had those games, but some of the buckets that Connor's had haven't been, when the game's on the line. Because if you look at these losses, Danny, over the 5 of 6, this window here over the past month, Nebraska's been in essentially every one of those games outside of Penn State.
Yeah.
When they lost to Minnesota at home, it was a 3-point game. When they lost to Michigan at home, it was a 3-point game. When they lost to Ohio State, it was in double overtime. So you're really just walking on that line. And that line has not only determined those individual games, it's really ultimately going to decide whether Nebraska plays in the NCAA tournament or not.
Yeah. And so moving on here to wrestling here really quick. Big Ten tournaments this weekend. Is there anyone that you have eyes on, or just kind of the team as a whole?
Well, Silas Allred has won a Big Ten championship before. He's not the reigning champ. He wrestles at 184. He's had a nice season. I think this is Brock Hardy's chance. He's at 141 and been so close to a conference title year in and year out, but he also has to wrestle against the guys from Penn State and Iowa, and that's always tough. So these conference meets, wrestling-wise, are generally dominated by the two best wrestling teams in the NCAA. Just happens to be in Nebraska's conference. But Nebraska has the firepower to have guys challenge for a league championship. I think it starts with Hardy at 141. He's got a 19-3 record on the season. They have two wrestlers with 19 wins on the year. And then you got to also factor in Silas Allred. It's going to be Christopher Minto. He's a redshirt freshman for the Huskers. I believe he's 18-2 on the year. How does a freshman do when he's wrestling at the conference meet? You never know. And he's at a weight division in which he can make some noise. Wrestles at 165.
Yeah, and there's a little pro and con there of wrestling against Penn State and Iowa during the regular season. Before you get to the conference tournament, you get to see them at least once. You get to go up against some tough competition. Hopefully, get you ready for this tournament and maybe get your mind right to hopefully beat them.
Absolutely. I'm trying to look at where the Big Tens are at. Welsh Ryan Arena in Evanston, Illinois. That's the host. The Big Ten championships are Saturday and Sunday. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, Nebraska hosted.
Yes.
And it was absolutely electric. So for the folks that hopefully were in attendance when Nebraska hosted the Big Tens, there's maybe that soft spot, and it will lure you back into paying a little bit more attention to the conference meet, because there is some elite wrestling in the Big Ten. And Nebraska's right there in the mix. It's not like the Huskers send a couple of guys to the conference meet. No, they have 7 seeded wrestlers, and a few of those dudes, as I mentioned, Minto, Pinto, Hardy, Allred, all should have a chance at making a run on Sunday.
Yeah. Shifting gears to some of the spring sports, softball, baseball. They had to switch things around this weekend because of the weather a little bit. Baseball going to play their home opener against Washington this weekend. What are your thoughts on that?
But is anybody surprised an early March home game at Nebraska doesn't happen?
No.
That's a risky scheduling play right there.
Yeah, definitely a risk you take.
I do feel bad for Will Bolt, because they were supposed to play at Omaha on Tuesday. That was the night of the blizzard. So of course, that game didn't happen. Then they wanted to play on Wednesday for their first home game of the season. Well, it was still really cold, and there was still some snow on the ground. That didn't happen. And they had hoped to play their Big Ten opener in Lincoln on March 7th. They're supposed to be playing right now, Danielle. They're not playing right now.
A little too cold out there.
A little too cold, a little bit moist. So hopefully Will Bolt and his team can finally get back in action on Saturday the way that they altered the schedule. Tuesday's game at Omaha has been rescheduled for April. Wednesday, just not going to happen. And then Friday, today's game, has been lopped into a doubleheader that's going to start at 1 o'clock on Saturday at Hawks Field. So bundle up. Yeah. It'll still be a little bit cold.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about how big of a loss Mason McConaughey is going out with a season-ending injury. They announced that this week.
Yeah, that's tough. That's your ace. That's the tone setter for the team and arguably Nebraska's best player. A pitcher, a senior, a right-hander, a preseason All-American, and man, he was so good in May and then during the Big Ten tournament last year and then into the NCAA tournament. So even the MLB scouts were keeping a close eye on Mason McConaughey, and he got the ball for Nebraska's season opener this year, and I believe he struck out 5 or 6 batters in a row and was just absolutely dominant. And that was kind of a snapshot of what he could potentially do this season. Unfortunately, it ends only a couple of starts in. Baseball can just be a cruel game. Sports can just be cruel in general. But it's an arm injury for Mason, and Will Bolt is confident that he will have a successful recovery, and he expects him to be back on the field next year.
I was going to say, you mentioned that he was a senior, and that's a tough decision to make. Have an injury your senior year, but if you love the game, you'll come back.
It's an arm injury, so I would tend to think that a player like Mason's going to want to get back on the mound and play another college season to prove to all the scouts that he is fully healed, he's recovered, and that he has a future in the sport. Because sometimes when you're a pitcher and it's a throwing arm injury, your stock and your potential of playing professionally can really be altered.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to softball. Big Red Spring Fling also had some changes moving from Thursday, Friday to Saturday, Sunday. They're playing kind of some smaller colleges. What are your thoughts on after they've been playing in tournaments against some of these big ranked teams?
Well, this is going to be fans' chance to see Jordy Ball play at home for the first time. I mean, it has happened during the spring, but not for an official game. Last year, her injury happened on the road in the season opener, so she was introduced. She had her Nebraska sophomore Jordy Ball, and everybody cheered, but she was in a coat, and she wasn't in full uniform, and everybody knew she was not going to get on the field. This weekend, Jordy Ball is going to get on the field, and there's going to be fans in the stands. And there's one player. They want to watch the team, right? Don't get me wrong. But there's really one player they really want to watch, and that's Jordy Ball. And they'll get to see her pitch. They'll get to see her hit, and they'll get to see her play in the field. Where will she be in the field? Got to ask Rhonda Ravel on that because they've moved her all around. She's mostly in the outfield. She'll be the DH. You got a little bit of first base in there so far this season. So that's the excitement with this volleyball team being at home. Finally, despite the scheduling challenges, is the fans have waited so long, Danielle, to cheer and roar for Jordy Ball as she is introduced. And then take the field, and it's going to happen this weekend.
Yeah, and they have a lot of opportunities to cheer because this team seems to be getting a lot of runs.
Oh, my goodness. They are hitting the ball like crazy. I believe they have 2 players already with double-digit home runs on the season, and Jordy's one of them.
Mm-hmm. All right, I want to touch on Beach really quick. They strolled right past Park here today. Talk about how this is kind of a less stressful environment for these girls to build some relationships and still work on some skills.
It is so chill. And it's really hard. It's really hard to explain to people because their home matches for beach volleyball, outside of the few very select times that they have been able to go outside and play on the UNL sand courts, they're closed to the public. They're indoors. It's next to a weight room. It's at the end of the Hawks Championship Center. So really, there's not even any foot traffic.
Yeah. If
you want to watch them, you are walking there with a purpose, and you're there to watch them. And people can't go watch them. So luckily, with our credentials and being able to cover the team and report on the beach volleyball season, we're able to be there. But it is so laid back. It's insanely hard to describe because you will see players just kind of come and go. It's not like the bench is doing any cheers or chants. They're just watching. Sometimes these players are even doing TikToks. Like as a match is going on. I kid you not. And the coaches, of course, they're coaching. Kelly and Jalen are the 2 primary beach coaches, and they're involved. But when one match is done, let's say Nebraska's number 5s are done and the number 4s are getting warmed up, the coaches come over to the bench and they'll just have very casual conversations and they'll joke, hey, what do you want to have for lunch? What are we thinking? And then somebody places a delivery order for Jimmy John's. And it's almost like just you and your friends kind of hanging out with the sand volleyball court right beside you.
Yeah, doing what you love. And, April 26th is going to be here before you know it. Nebraska volleyball going to be taking on Kansas in the exhibition match. Husker Games. What are your thoughts on what they've kind of put together in place of a Nebraska football spring game?
What do I think of it? Since you asked me what do I think of it, for what it's worth, I really wish there was a football game.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for a lot of fans who don't get the opportunity to watch Nebraska football during the fall, because this is the opportunity to go see this team, because it's a cheap ticket. You can get generally good seats. And if you have a family of 4, 5, 6, 7, and you can't afford to pay the price of a ticket during the fall, those folks look so forward to watching the team during the red-white scrimmage. And plus, it's that warm and fuzzy, we're all back together feeling across the fan base in April or May, whenever the game is, that you get just a small taste of the fall. So whether you're a season ticket holder or that's the only game you're going to go to in that calendar year, you get to experience a little bit of Nebraska football, and it can make you yearn for September and October and November. So that's not going to happen. That's my curiosity with what Husker Games is going to be like. What's the attendance? And what's the response? We do know that Nebraska athletics never fails in putting on a really good event. Yeah. Whether it's celebrating the sellout streak or a longtime coach that's come back or anything, Nebraska athletics generally do a very good job with big events. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that this is going to be a well-run event. I just hope people go. Because I know some fans, and I've talked to a number of fans, that have been turned off by the entire idea of, well, you've taken our football game away, now we really don't even want to go. Even though they're still trying to lure people in with the skills competition, the 7-on-7, there's going to be a women's flag football exhibition, and then that's going to lead right into the soccer exhibition, and then volleyball at night. I even made the argument that, if the football team's a little bit lukewarm on having a red-white scrimmage because of the reasons that Matt Rule outlined. Injury potential, their players are going to be on tape, and that can open up a whole nother can of worms with players getting lured and poached, and the transfer portal being at play with Nebraska's televised spring game. If there are that many turnoffs for football, why don't you go all in on volleyball? Yeah. Because people will go to that volleyball match. Right? Yeah, especially since it's 2 first-year head coaches. So on April, what's the date? 26th, I believe? Saturday. Is the Devaney going to be sold out? I would say so. Yes, it is. Yeah. So, okay, I would contend, and that's why I'm right here just yapping about it, and I'm not in the meeting rooms with Troy Dannon and the Nebraska athletic staff. I would contend, okay, if the football doesn't want to do it, why don't we just say this is our spring volleyball match? And you can still bring in Kansas. And we're going to put on a show. Our volleyball team is going to put a butt in every single seat inside the Devaney Center. And then our football team is going to show up 3 hours ahead of time, and they're going to do a meet and greet and have autograph lines. So you could loop all that stuff together. And I could understand, well, the football fans want to meet those players, but they don't necessarily want to attend the volleyball match. Okay, so put the players, in tents, underneath tents right outside the Devaney Center. So that's an open walkway. You could create a little festival feel. Yeah. But again, the cornerstone of the day could be volleyball, because people will not be turned off by that, right? I mean, we all know they've almost filled Memorial Stadium to the brim. So they're not, it being on a Saturday, it would shut down the entire city of Lincoln, I feel and even Nebraska's red-white volleyball scrimmage generally draws a very good crowd. It's borderline sold out. So with a team like Kansas playing Nebraska with a new coach and with the new freshman